Imagine being in a position where your entire life's work is questioned, your integrity torn apart, and the very foundation of your career shattered by a single false accusation. That's exactly what happened to Mr. Jamal Thompson, a beloved high school teacher who had dedicated over 15 years to educating and inspiring students in his community. Known for his warm smile, encouraging words, and dedication to his students, Jamal was the kind of teacher who made a difference. Every student who walked into his classroom knew they were valued, no matter where they came from or what their circumstances were. But one day, everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Jamal was called into the principal's office. At first, he thought it was about the school's upcoming parent-teacher conference. Little did he know, his world was about to be turned upside down. As soon as he stepped into the room, he sensed something was wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, and the principal, Mr. Jacobs, sat behind his desk with a serious expression. Sitting next to him was the school's guidance counselor, Mrs. Rivera, who couldn't even make eye contact with Jamal. Something was off, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. "Jamal, we've received some concerning reports," Mr. Jacobs began, his voice grave. "There's been an accusation made against you." Jamal's heart sank. Accusation? His mind raced, but he couldn't think of anything that could warrant this kind of meeting. He had always been careful to maintain professional boundaries with his students, always going the extra mile to ensure they felt safe and respected in his classroom. "A student claims you've acted inappropriately," Mr. Jacobs continued, his tone cold and distant. "We'll need to investigate this further." Inappropriately? The word echoed in Jamal's mind like a punch to the gut. He knew without a doubt that he had never crossed any lines. But as the meeting dragged on, the details became hazy and vague. The student making the accusation remained anonymous, and the specifics of the claim were left deliberately unclear. It was as if they were accusing him of something without really saying what it was. Jamal tried to speak up, to defend himself, but every word he said seemed to fall on deaf ears. The look on Mr. Jacobs' face was already one of judgment. It was clear that in his mind, Jamal was guilty until proven innocent. The weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. How could this be happening? How could his career, his reputation, and his life be jeopardized by something so baseless? But what hurt the most was the silence from his colleagues. People he had worked with for years, teachers he had called friends, began to distance themselves from him. The whispers in the hallway, the stolen glances, the cold shoulders. Suddenly, Jamal found himself isolated. No one wanted to be associated with the teacher at the center of a scandal. As the investigation unfolded, the accusations grew, fueled by rumors and speculation. It became clear that someone had a personal agenda, someone who wanted to see Jamal fall. But who? And why? Jamal knew he needed to find the truth, not just for his own sake, but for the students who depended on him. But the deeper he dug, the more dangerous things became. This wasn't just about a false accusation anymore. There was something much bigger at play, a web of deceit that went beyond the walls of the school. Secrets long buried were starting to surface, and powerful people were involved. The closer Jamal got to uncovering the truth, the more he realized that his fight was not just about clearing his name, it was about exposing corruption at the highest levels. But just as Jamal was about to connect the final dots, something unexpected happened. A piece of evidence disappeared. The one thing that could have exonerated him was gone without a trace. And with it, Jamal's hope began to fade. Will Jamal find the truth before it's too late? Or will he lose everything he's worked so hard for? You won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned for the full story of how a falsely accused teacher risked everything to expose the truth, and the shocking revelation that changes everything. Jamal left the principal's office with his heart pounding and his mind swirling. He had walked into that room thinking it was just another day at work, but now he was stepping into a nightmare. How could everything turn upside down so fast? The accusation lingered in his mind, but even more so, the fact that the details were left so vague, he had no idea what he was being accused of specifically, who was behind it, or why. All he knew was that his entire career was now in jeopardy, and his life as he knew it was slipping through his fingers. The hallways seemed different now. Every student, every teacher, every person he passed, he could feel their eyes on him. They knew something. They all knew. The news spread fast, and in a place like this, rumors traveled quicker than wildfire. It didn't matter if the truth hadn't come out yet. People believed what they wanted to believe, and right now, they wanted to believe the worst about him. Jamal tried to hold his head high, tried to ignore the stares and whispers, but it was no use. By the time he reached his classroom, the weight of it all was too much. He closed the door behind him and sank into his chair, his hands trembling as he stared out the window. This was more than just a false accusation. It was an attack on who he was, everything he stood for. For 15 years, he had worked hard to be a role model for his students. He had given everything to this school, to this community. How could this be happening? He thought about his students. They were the reason he loved teaching, the ones who needed guidance, support, and someone who believed in them. Jamal had always gone the extra mile to make sure his students knew they had someone in their corner. But now, who would be in his corner? The more he thought about it, the more alone he felt. No one was coming to his defense. Not a single colleague, not even the people he had considered friends, had reached out to him. It was as if he had become untouchable overnight. Jamal's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He looked up to see one of his students, a quiet girl named Leah, standing hesitantly in the doorway. She was one of the few students who never caused trouble, always doing her work and staying out of the spotlight. But there was something different about her now, something in her eyes that told Jamal she had come to say something important. "Mr. Thompson," Leah began softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "I heard about what they're saying." Jamal's chest tightened. Even his students were hearing about it. He wanted to tell her not to worry, that everything was fine, but he couldn't find the words. The truth was, he didn't know if everything was going to be fine. "I just wanted to tell you," Leah continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't believe any of it. You've always been good to us. You've always looked out for us. I know you didn't do anything wrong." Her words hit Jamal harder than he expected. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, someone was standing by him. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. "Thank you, Leah," Jamal said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot to me." Leah nodded, but she didn't leave right away. She stood there for a moment, as if she was debating whether or not to say something more. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke again. "There's something else," she said quietly. "I think I know who's behind this." Jamal's eyes widened. This was the first time anyone had hinted at knowing more about the situation. "Who?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. Leah hesitated, glancing at the door as if to make sure no one was listening. "I don't have proof," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I've seen things. There's this group of students. They've been saying stuff about you for a while now, spreading rumors." Jamal's heart sank. Rumors. It was always rumors. In a school, rumors had the power to destroy someone's reputation faster than anything else. But who would want to do this to him? "Who are they?" Jamal asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Leah shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know all of them," she admitted, "but I know one of them is Caleb. He's been saying things about you since last year." Jamal's mind raced. Caleb. He knew the name Caleb was a student who had caused problems in the past, always testing boundaries and pushing limits. Jamal had tried to help him, had even gone out of his way to make sure Caleb didn't fall through the cracks. But Caleb had always resisted, always seemed angry about something. Could he really be the one behind all of this? I don't understand why he would do this, Jamal said, more to himself than to Leah. Leah shrugged. I don't know either, she said, but I thought you should know. Jamal nodded, his thoughts spinning. If Caleb was involved, this might be bigger than he thought. But why? What would Caleb gain from ruining his life? Jamal didn't have answers yet, but at least now he had a direction. He wasn't completely in the dark anymore. Thank you, Leah, he said again. You've helped me more than you know. Leah gave him a small smile before slipping out of the room, leaving Jamal alone with his thoughts once more. As the day went on, the tension in the school grew thicker. Jamal could feel it in every interaction, in every glance thrown his way. Even the students who usually looked up to him were now avoiding eye contact, unsure of what to believe. And the teachers? They kept their distance too, afraid of getting caught up in the storm that was brewing around him. That afternoon, Jamal received an email from the school district's Human Resources Department. It was official. He was being placed on administrative leave while the investigation continued. The words on the screen felt like a slap in the face. Administrative leave. It was a fancy way of saying he was being pushed out, silenced until they could decide whether or not to fire him. Jamal closed his laptop and buried his face in his hands. Everything he had worked for was crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. He had always believed in justice, in doing what was right. But now he was the one being wronged, and it seemed like no one cared. As the days turned into weeks, Jamal's life became a blur of uncertainty. He met with lawyers, answered questions from investigators, and tried to hold on to some sense of normalcy. But it was impossible. The weight of the accusation followed him everywhere. Even outside of school, people looked at him differently. The parents of his students, people in the community, they all knew what was going on. And while some offered their support, most kept their distance, afraid to get involved in something that could potentially ruin their own reputations. The most painful part of it all was watching his own family struggle with the situation. Jamal's wife, Angela, tried to stay strong, but he could see the worry in her eyes every time they talked about what was happening. Their two young children didn't fully understand what was going on, but they could sense that something was wrong. The stress was taking its toll on all of them, but Jamal couldn't give up. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, and he wasn't going to let a lie destroy everything he had built. He started digging deeper into Caleb's involvement, trying to figure out why the student would go to such lengths to ruin him. But every time he got close to finding something, the trail went cold. It was as if Caleb had covered his tracks, leaving Jamal with nothing to hold on to. Then one day, out of nowhere, Jamal received an anonymous tip. A message slipped into his mailbox at home, with no return address or name attached. It simply read, "The truth is closer than you think. Watch your back." Jamal's hands trembled as he read the note. The truth. Someone out there knew what was really going on, but instead of helping him, they were warning him. Watch your back. The words sent a chill down his spine. Jamal stood frozen, staring at the note in his hand. The truth is closer than you think. Watch your back. The words played over and over in his mind, like a warning he couldn't shake. Someone knew the truth, but instead of helping him, they were being cryptic, almost as if they were afraid to come forward. But why? What did they have to lose, and how were they connected to all of this? His first instinct was to tell Angela, but something stopped him. The note felt like a private message, a secret between him and whoever had sent it. And the warning to watch your back didn't just feel ominous. It felt like a threat. Whoever was behind this didn't want Jamal digging too deep, and the closer he got, the more dangerous it seemed to become. Jamal stuffed the note into his jacket pocket and glanced around his neighborhood. Everything looked normal: the houses, the street, the cars parked neatly in their driveways. But now, everything felt different. Was someone watching him? Was he being followed? His heart pounded in his chest as he walked back into the house, trying to act as though nothing was wrong, though his mind was racing with 1,000 questions. Angela was in the kitchen, helping their youngest child with homework. She looked up when Jamal walked in, her eyes searching his face for some sign of what he was thinking. She knew he'd been stressed, that the investigation was wearing on him, but Jamal hadn't told her about the note yet. He didn't want to worry her more than she already was. "How was your day?" she asked softly, keeping her tone casual for the kid's sake. Jamal forced a smile. "Same as usual," he lied. "Just trying to figure all this out." Angela nodded, but he could see the concern etched in her expression. She wanted to help, but there was nothing either of them could do except wait. Wait for the investigation to finish. Wait for someone to come forward and tell the truth. But now, with the note in hand, Jamal realized that waiting wasn't going to be enough. He needed to take action, but he had to be careful. Whoever was involved in this wasn't playing fair. The next day, Jamal decided to confront Caleb. If Leah's suspicions were right, Caleb was at the center of this whole mess. He had to know something, and Jamal wasn't going to let this go without a fight. Caleb had always been a troubled student, smart, but rebellious. Jamal had seen potential in him, had tried to guide him in the right direction, but Caleb had pushed back at every turn. Jamal waited in his car outside the school, watching the students leave for the day. He knew Caleb would be among them, and sure enough, there he was, walking with a group of friends, laughing and joking, as if nothing was wrong. Jamal felt a wave of frustration wash over him. Caleb didn't look like someone whose lies were tearing another person's life apart. He got out of the car and called out to him. "Caleb, can I talk to you for a second?" Caleb glanced over, surprised to see Jamal. His friends exchanged glances, but said nothing, as Caleb stepped away from the group. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice defensive. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to keep his tone calm. "I just want to know the truth, Caleb. Why are you doing this? Why are you spreading these rumors about me?" Caleb's face twisted into a smirk. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, Caleb," Jamal said, his voice firmer now. "I know you've been talking about me. I know you've been telling people things that aren't true, but I need to understand why." For a moment, Caleb didn't respond. He just stared at Jamal, his eyes cold and unreadable. Then, he shrugged. "Maybe you're not as perfect as you think you are, Mr. Thompson." Jamal's stomach churned. This wasn't just a rebellious student acting out. There was something deeper here, something personal. "What did I do, Caleb? I've tried to help you. I've always had your back. Why are you trying to destroy my career?" Caleb's smirk faded, replaced by something darker. "You think you're a hero, don't you?" he spat. "You think just because you help a few kids, everyone's supposed to worship you. But you're not a hero. You're just another teacher who doesn't care about anything but himself." The words stung, but Jamal didn't back down. "I care about my students, Caleb. I care about you. That's why I'm asking you to tell the truth." For a second, something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Guilt, maybe? But just as quickly, it was gone. "I don't owe you anything," he said, turning on his heel and walking away. Jamal stood there, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Caleb wasn't going to give him any answers, not like this. But there was something more going on. This wasn't just a simple case of a student causing trouble. Caleb's hostility felt personal, as if Jamal had wronged him in some way that he didn't even understand. As Jamal drove home, the note burned in his pocket. "The truth is closer than you think." Caleb's reaction had only made things murkier. Was he really the one behind this, or was he just a piece of a larger puzzle? Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that there were bigger forces at play, forces that Caleb might not even fully understand himself. Later that evening, Jamal received a phone call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Mr. Thompson?" a voice said on the other end. It was a woman's voice, shaky and nervous. Speaking, Jamal replied, his heart racing. I don't have much time, the woman said quickly. But I need you to know that you're not alone in this. There's more going on than you realize. Caleb isn't the one you need to worry about. Jamal's grip tightened on the phone. Who are you? How do you know about this? I can't say, the woman whispered. But you're in danger. There are people who don't want the truth to come out, and they'll do anything to stop you. The line went dead before Jamal could ask any more questions. He stood there, staring at the phone, his mind racing. Danger? People who didn't want the truth to come out. The mystery was deepening, and with every new piece of information, the stakes were rising. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just a false accusation. Someone was pulling the strings, manipulating things behind the scenes. But who? And why? He needed answers, and fast. But with every step he took, the danger seemed to grow. The next morning, Jamal woke up to find his car vandalized. The tires were slashed, and the windows had been smashed in. Spray painted across the side of the car were the words, "Keep your mouth shut." Jamal's stomach twisted in fear. This wasn't just about ruining his career anymore. Someone was trying to scare him into silence. Angela rushed outside when she saw the damage, her face pale with shock. Jamal, what's going on? Who would do this? Jamal clenched his fists, his mind spinning. I don't know, he said, though deep down he had a feeling it was connected to the phone call from the night before. Someone was trying to send a message. They called the police, but Jamal knew it wouldn't do much. This was bigger than just vandalism. Whoever was behind this had the power to hurt him, not just professionally, but physically. The note, the phone call, the vandalism, it was all connected. But Jamal didn't know who he could trust. Over the next few days, things continued to escalate. More anonymous notes appeared in his mailbox, each one more threatening than the last. His phone rang constantly with blocked calls, but when he answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Angela grew more and more worried, urging him to drop everything and move away, to get out of town before things got worse. But Jamal couldn't walk away. He knew that giving up now would mean letting whoever was behind this win. He had to find out the truth, even if it meant putting himself in danger. For the sake of his family, his students, and his own peace of mind, he couldn't let these people control his life. One night, as Jamal sat alone in his living room, going over everything that had happened, he received another call. This time, there was no hesitation. The voice on the other end was clear, direct. If you keep pushing, you're going to regret it, the voice said. This is your last warning. Jamal's blood ran cold. Who are you? He demanded, his voice shaking with anger. What do you want from me? The line went dead again. Jamal slammed the phone down, his heart pounding in his chest. He was running out of time. The threats were getting more serious, and whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop until they silenced him for good. But despite the fear gnawing at him, Jamal knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it no matter what it took. Jamal sat in his living room, exhausted and tense, with every nerve on edge. The threats were no longer just words on paper. They were visceral, real, and closing in on him. His family was in danger. He was in danger. Yet despite all the warnings, he couldn't let it go. He couldn't allow a lie to destroy his life without a fight. The last phone call had left him shaken, but it also lit a spark of defiance. Whoever was behind this wanted him silent, scared, and hopeless. And Jamal knew that backing down would give them exactly what they wanted. That night, he made a decision. He was going to confront Caleb one last time. Something told him that whatever Caleb was hiding was the key to uncovering the entire scheme. The following morning, Jamal drove to the school, arriving before the halls filled with students. He spotted Caleb alone, near the lockers, and approached him, his voice steady but urgent. Caleb, we need to talk. Right now." Caleb glanced around, his face tight with reluctance. "What do you want, Mr. Thompson? This has to stop. You know something, and if you don't come clean, I'll make sure this doesn't end quietly." A flicker of fear crossed Caleb's eyes, but he quickly masked it with anger. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You've been a part of this from the start. You think I don't know that?" For a moment, Caleb looked like he might say something, but then he caught sight of someone coming down the hallway. Jamal turned to see the principal, Mrs. Evans, approaching. She wore the same neutral expression she'd had in every meeting about the investigation, but Jamal noticed something odd in her gaze, a flicker of something colder, sharper. "Is there a problem here?" Mrs. Evans asked, her eyes shifting between Jamal and Caleb. "No problem," Jamal replied, though he could feel tension radiating from Caleb. Mrs. Evans looked at him for a moment, then nodded to Caleb. "Go on to class," she said, her voice carrying a subtle edge of warning. Caleb didn't hesitate. He walked away without another glance, leaving Jamal alone with Mrs. Evans. As she watched Caleb disappear down the hall, Mrs. Evans turned to Jamal, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson, I need to remind you that this investigation is ongoing, and any attempts to interfere with students or faculty will only reflect poorly on you." Jamal met her gaze, a sense of dread gnawing at him. "Why are you so eager to see this through, Mrs. Evans? Why aren't you interested in finding out the truth?" Mrs. Evans narrowed her eyes. "I'm interested in protecting this school and the students who attend it. And I'd advise you to keep that in mind before you do something you'll regret." As she turned to leave, Jamal's frustration boiled over. "Is that a threat?" She paused, looking back at him with a smirk that barely reached her eyes. "Take it however you like." Jamal was left standing alone, his mind racing. For the first time, he realized that Mrs. Evans might not be a neutral party in this. She had been handling his case from the beginning, subtly steering the investigation in a way that almost ensured he looked guilty. But why? What did she stand to gain? The answer came to him later that day when he was combing through his notes and emails from his years of teaching. Among them, he found a name he hadn't thought of in years: David Evans, a former teacher at the school. David had been forced to resign after being caught in a scandal, one that Jamal had unwittingly exposed when he reported irregularities in the school's grading system. It was a small complaint, but it had snowballed, leading to an investigation that uncovered David's misconduct. Jamal realized with a sickening feeling that Mrs. Evans was David's sister. She had taken over the principal's position soon after his resignation. This wasn't just about Caleb. Mrs. Evans had a personal vendetta against Jamal, and she was using Caleb to orchestrate it. It all made sense now: the vague accusations, the lack of concrete evidence, the subtle encouragement for others to believe he was guilty. She was manipulating the entire situation from behind the scenes. Jamal knew he had to get proof, and fast. But who would believe him? Mrs. Evans held all the power here, and without concrete evidence, any accusation he made would be easily dismissed as a desperate attempt to shift blame. That night, as Jamal sat at his kitchen table, going over every detail of the case, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short and cryptic: "Meet me at the park tomorrow at midnight. I have something you need to see." Jamal's instincts told him it was a trap, but he had no other leads. Whoever this person was, they claimed to have information, and at this point, he had nothing left to lose. The following night, Jamal arrived at the park just before midnight, the darkness pressing in around him. He waited anxiously, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Finally, a figure emerged from the trees, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and looking nervously over their shoulder. As they drew closer, Jamal recognized them. It was Leah, his quiet student who had first told him about Caleb. "Leah? What are you doing here?" he asked, stunned. "I had to tell you something, Mr. Thompson," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid of being seen. "I found something about Mrs. Evans." Jamal's heart raced. "What did you find?" Leah hesitated, then handed him a small flash drive. "I borrowed my mom's computer. She works in the school office, and I found some files that looked weird. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I had to know what was going on." Jamal took the flash drive, hardly daring to believe it. "What's on here?" "Emails," Leah said quietly, "between Mrs. Evans and some other people. They talk about you, about how to get rid of you." A chill ran through Jamal. This was it, the proof he needed. If these emails were as incriminating as Leah said, then Mrs. Evans's entire plot would be exposed. "Thank you, Leah," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me." Leah looked at him, her face full of fear and resolve. "I just wanted to help. You've always been there for us. You don't deserve this." With the flash drive clutched tightly in his hand, Jamal returned home, his mind spinning with anticipation. He plugged the drive into his laptop and opened the files. As he read through the emails, his suspicions were confirmed. The messages detailed a carefully orchestrated plan to discredit him, filled with instructions on how to subtly influence certain teachers and students to speak against him, even if they didn't have anything concrete to say. But the final email hit him the hardest. It was a message from Mrs. Evans to an anonymous recipient, dated just a few weeks ago. It read, "Once this is over, he'll never teach again. I've waited long enough to see him pay for what he did to my family." Jamal felt a surge of vindication and fury. This was all about revenge, a twisted, personal vendetta that had cost him his career, his reputation, and nearly his family's safety. But now he had the proof, and there was no way Mrs. Evans could continue her charade once this was exposed. The next morning, Jamal contacted a lawyer and handed over the flash drive, explaining everything he'd discovered. Together, they crafted a plan to bring the truth to light, making sure that the evidence was solid and undeniable. When school board received the flash drive, they were stunned. An emergency meeting was called, and within hours, the news had spread throughout the school and the community. Mrs. Evans was put on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and Jamal was finally vindicated. But final twist came later, during the investigation, when a second conspiracy was uncovered. It turned out that Mrs. Evans wasn't working alone. She had allies within the district, people who had also harbored grudges against Jamal, either out of jealousy or misplaced loyalty to her brother. They had all contributed, in small but significant ways, to the smear campaign against him, amplifying rumors, planting false accusations, and turning people against him. In the end, several administrators and teachers were implicated, leading to a massive shake-up within the school district. Jamal was officially cleared of all accusations and offered his position back, along with a public apology. But the experience had changed him. Though he loved teaching, he realized he could no longer work in a place that had allowed such corruption to fester. With a heavy heart, Jamal decided to leave the school. He accepted a position at a different district where he could start fresh, free from the shadows of betrayal and resentment that had plagued him. And as he walked away from the school for the last time, he felt a sense of closure, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged by the people he'd helped expose. Jamal knew that he would always carry the scars of what he'd been through, but he also knew that he had finally won. He had uncovered the truth, faced his enemies, and come out stronger on the other side. And as he looked toward the future, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue his journey, no longer as a victim, but as a survivor and a fighter for justice. As Jamal drove away from the school he had once called home, he took a deep breath and allowed himself to reflect on everything he had been through. The journey had been darker than he'd ever imagined, filled with betrayal, danger, and sleepless nights. The people he'd trusted, those he'd worked alongside, had turned against him, twisting his words and actions until he'd become a stranger in his own life. And yet, despite it all, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had found the truth and fought to clear his name, and even though he was leaving behind his old life, he knew he was walking away with his dignity intact. Jamal was grateful for the friends and family who had stood by him, people like Angela, who had been his rock, grounding him when he felt lost. Through it all, she had never doubted his innocence, and her belief in him had given him the strength to keep fighting, even when he felt like giving up. Leah's courage, too, had been a turning point in his journey. Her willingness to take a stand, despite her own fears, had been the key to bringing the truth to light. She reminded him of why he had chosen to become a teacher in the first place, to inspire young people to think for themselves and to stand up for what was right. As he settled into his new position at another school in a neighboring district, Jamal found himself welcomed by a supportive community of educators and administrators who valued integrity and transparency. For the first time in a long while, he felt at ease walking into the classroom each day, knowing he could focus solely on his students without looking over his shoulder. His new colleagues respected his experience and had heard about the ordeal he'd gone through. Rather than judging him, they admired his resilience and were eager to learn from his story. Though he was grateful for the fresh start, the weight of what he had endured stayed with him. Jamal realized that this experience had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He was more cautious, more aware of the complexities of human nature, but he also felt a renewed commitment to his role as an educator. He knew now, more than ever, how vital it was to support students who might be going through struggles they couldn't openly talk about. He wanted to be the kind of teacher who noticed when something was wrong and who would listen without judgment, a lesson he had learned the hard way. One evening, a few months after starting his new job, Jamal received a letter from Caleb. He hesitated before opening it, unsure of what Caleb could possibly want to say now. As he unfolded the letter, he recognized the shaky handwriting, the words written with a vulnerability Jamal hadn't seen from Caleb before. "Mr. Thompson, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you the truth. I didn't fully understand what was happening, and I didn't realize how much trouble I was causing until it was too late. I thought I was just getting back at you for being strict with me in class. But Mrs. Evans, she twisted everything, and I got pulled into something bigger than I ever meant to. I was too scared to say anything once things got serious. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I've started seeing a counselor, trying to figure out why I do things without thinking about the consequences. I wish I could take it all back. Maybe one day, I can make things right, even if you don't forgive me. Caleb." Jamal read the letter twice, letting Caleb's words sink in. It wasn't easy to forgive the pain that Caleb had caused, but he could see that the boy was finally trying to take responsibility. Jamal had always known Caleb was troubled, acting out as a way of coping with his own struggles. Now, Caleb was beginning to confront his issues head-on, and that was a start. Jamal couldn't undo the past, but he could choose to let go of the anger he'd felt. Maybe, in time, Caleb would find his own path to redemption, just as Jamal had found his way through the darkness. As the seasons passed, Jamal poured himself into his work, feeling a new sense of purpose and clarity. His experience had taught him that the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it was buried. Lies and deceit might cause harm, but they could never completely destroy a person's spirit. And as he moved forward, he held on to the belief that people, even those who had wronged him, could change. Word of his ordeal slowly faded from the headlines, replaced by new stories, new scandals, and new controversies. But for Jamal, the experience left an indelible mark on his heart. He knew that he would always remember the people who had helped him find his way, the students who believed in him, and the family who had been his unwavering support. Most importantly, he knew he had remained true to himself, holding on to his principles even when it felt like the whole world was against him. In the end, Jamal didn't need a public apology or the admiration of others. He didn't need to see Mrs. Evans punished or Caleb publicly shamed. All he needed was the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had stood up for himself and had come out stronger. His story became a reminder of resilience to everyone who knew him, a testament to the power of integrity in the face of injustice. Life moved on, and so did he, embracing the lessons he had learned with an open heart. And as he watched his students grow and learn, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey he had taken. For Jamal, the hardest part was over, and he was finally free to build a life that was richer, wiser, and more compassionate than before. In his heart, he knew he would carry the scars, but he also knew they were part of a story worth telling, a story of truth, resilience, and the strength to start again.